Hello and welcome, young Padawans. I'm Joe. Here with me is my co-host, Master Dan.
Hello and greetings.
Today we are going to continue our review of the Tales of the Jedi story, namely the fall of the Sith Empire. This story is relatively simple to tell because basically Jory Daragon goes back to the Republic, which arrests her, and even Arba turns on her a little.
I mean, she did commit several major crimes.
But she comes bearing news that the Republic is in danger and that the Sith Empire is out there. She's imprisoned, rather foolishly, by the Republic officials, and they mock her.
Agreed.
Stupidly. And meanwhile, Gav is being corrupted by Nagasato. Odan-urr, in turn, is warning Teta about the Sith Empire. He's not listened to either. Nobody seems to be listening to anyone who has a brain in this series. I'm joking. But odan-urr is basically in the Cassandra role from the story of Troy. And so, when the Sith Empire attack comes, you have the Republic, which is taken aback and shocked, save for Empress Teta, because while odan-urr was pressing her, she didn't fully want to believe him. But then Jory, who slipped out of her slave camp because she was enslaved on one of the mines of Sinagar, which puts Empress Teta into question as a moral person, given that she's keeping slaves. And so Jory goes off and warns Teta, slipping into her palace, and Teta's first instinct is to kill her, thinking her an assassin. Jory negotiates with her and de-escalates the situation very well. And odan-urr joins in de-escalating the situation. So Empress Teta begins preparations. War takes place quite some time later, and over the course of some time, probably years, war eventually exhausts both sides. And the war is taken to Sinagar, where Gav Daragon slays Arba in one of the most heart-wrenching scenes, as Jory then picks up a lightsaber and attempts to cleave her brother down, which is rather horrifying considering they're siblings. She does this, then breaks down crying a little over Arba, who basically died trying to interject himself between the siblings to shield Jory a little, because while he did end up kind of suing her, a part of him still bore a great deal of paternal love for her and Gav, and Arba did not believe that Gav would harm him. Sadly for the poor hut, Gav murders him in a rage. Jory chases after Gav, trying to reason with him and yell at him. Gav throws himself into his ship, takes off, and tragically decides that his life isn't worthy of being lived anymore, and that he's done too many horrible things. And so he partially takes the coward's way out and decides to basically suicide bomb Nagasato almost. Gav helps tip the battle and war as he dies to warn the Republic to steer clear from Nagasato and his fleet, with Nagasato using the Force in an awesome demonstration, basically using solar flares and the sun to wipe them out, which, that's terrifying. Just how powerful. Like, you look at Nagasato's demonstrations of power, and you compare that to Darth Vader or Palpatine, it's pitiful. Palpatine and Vader are basically children. I'd hate to see what the midichlorian count of Nagasato is. Obviously, he's way more powerful. And he's supposed to be puny compared to Marka Ragnos. How powerful were these Sith Lords? Maybe it's like Kreia says. If you were to stand before an ancient Dark Lord in battle, you would find that we are as children playing with toys in comparison to the real masters. Now, here's the thing. Odan-urr, over the course of the war, proves himself an incredible warrior and defeats many of the greatest Dark Lords in battle, and sadly has to bury his master Uru, who dies, complaining that he wishes he had at least one last chance to swim in the waters of his of his homeworld where he was born, which is a rather sad scene because we see that Uru, although an old man, still longed for the simple pleasures of life, which, poor guy. And Uru predicts that odan-urr will live to a ripe old age, become wiser than him, and build the greatest center of knowledge and wisdom in history before he dies surrounded by his own scrolls, and artifacts. Odan-urr ends up leading the Republic. Now, odan-urr in this war did use his battle meditation on top of fighting in the front lines. Wow. And used the Force to repulse a lot of dark side attacks, very likely from Republic fleets. The power of this guy. It's just mind-blowing. The trouble for Nagasato is that upon returning to his empire, he finds that Ludo Kresh was not really killed and that the remaining Dark Lords have crowned Kresh Dark Lord of the Sith, Emperor of the Sith Empire. And so a quick civil skirmish takes place. Kresh is, killed and, of course, buried on Korriban in a hidden tomb, as we all know from KOTOR 2. Nagasato, meanwhile, fearing the Republic, flees into hyperspace, whilst using the Force to cause a supernova and control the supernova to destroy the pursuing fleet. And this while Nagasato is exhausted and pretty much wounded. That is terrifying. This is him at his weakest, and he's able to control solar flares and supernovas.
Well,
he had no need.
Pleasant foe.
He had no need for a Death Star. He was a Death Star on steroids. The trouble is, he realizes he can't win against a Republic, and settles down on Yavin, where his Massassi followers start building pyramids, and he vows vengeance. That said, odan-urr scavenges the relics of the Sith amongst their tombs, some of their tombs, and their ships, discovers a Sith holocron, and vows to build a great library on Ossus, away from the Republic, because he doesn't want to be involved in politics and whatnot. Who could blame him? The Jedi should never have established their main temple on Coruscant, because that tied them in with the political structure and system, and it's a very stupid move on their part. I'm just saying. I blame Nomi Sunrider for that one, but Nomi Sunrider was the worst. Anyways, odan-urr ends up, not really ruling, actually, I should say, leading the Jedi by example for 1,000 years. As for Jori Daragon, left without her brother and without her father figure, or grandfather figure, I should say, and with nothing, she is given a reward by Teda, who takes on all the glory by the Republic for essentially doing nothing except, basically she takes credit for Jori and odan-urr's work. And Jori ends up just asking for the repair shop of Arba, and that she'll basically run it. So, okay, good for her. She has a happily ever after, which I'm glad Jori got that.
Yeah, one thing I found a little funny when it came to Teda was still essentially on the front lines. Coruscant is like, oh, we chased away the Sith fleet. Party!
Freaking Coruscant, taking credit for everyone else's work.
And the fact that Teda isn't back yet. She's still on the front lines.
Yeah, at least we could give her that much.
She did take action.
Fair enough. But the Senate just awarding themselves essentially a triumph, and it's like, you didn't do anything.
You didn't even wait for the Empress that
won you your victory, along with odan-urr and Jori Daragon.
It's like, but pardon if I give Teda some credit.
Fair enough. She did lead well, for the most part. That said, that's pretty much it. The Sith Empire fell due to arrogance, folly, and honestly, endless narcissism on the part of their leaders, and a lack of unity And so we could derive a lot of lessons from this tale. That said, I also want to highlight one lore detail we didn't last time, which is that Zeost is the birthplace of darkness to an extent in Star Wars, in that it is the foulest planet, the most corruptive in the power of the dark side, as it was the throne world of the Sith. And it's interesting that in the original comics, it is never portrayed as having any kind of sunlight or jungle. It's purely portrayed as an icy world with a lot of palaces, but it's reminiscent of the Snow Queen or Witch Queen or whatever of Narnia, of her realm within Narnia, which I really like that. I think there was a deliberate nod being done. So I don't like the sequel novels turning it into a jungle world or something. Maybe it could be portrayed in some places, but I like the idea that it's an icy world without too much life on it. And what life is there will probably just be monsters, as this is a place purely, well, writhing purely with the dark side.
It's like Jadis's home world from...
Oh, yeah, that's what I imagine as well, to an extent.
I can see Jadis as a dark lady.
Yeah, like that. Yeah, she is a dark lady. And so that world, that's what that world kind of reminded me of when I first read that Narnia book. I was reminded of Zeost from the Tales of the Jedi.
A combination between her realm in Narnia and her original world.
Yeah, and the trouble is that the sequel authors did not like that and did not want to go down that road. They tried to retcon it into a forest planet. And to something that's not so bad, and that Ben Skywalker, a short-tempered, egotistical, narcissistic character like him, could handle. Which...
He's not Anakin Solo.
No, Anakin could probably tolerate it and endure it. But we got to bear in mind, this place... Yeah, Jory Daragon being able to manage this place's darkness is one thing. But even she was sort of affected by it. Gav was affected by it, and he's way stronger-willed than Ben Skywalker ever was. And he was completely and utterly corrupted for a time. Now, we are supposed to kind of infer that there's a similarity between Jory's tale and Luke's tale, and that of Gav and Anakin, I think. So there's a lot of similarities there. Now let's rate this graphic novel, part 1 and part 2, together, because it's really one story. Now, the artwork in these stories is perfect. The coloring is perfect. The characters are great. And they even speak in that grand operatic way that all Lucasian sci-fi characters do, like his Star Wars characters. Indiana Jones, they don't always talk like that, but actually, even his fantasy stories talk like that. That Lucasian operatic way, because Willow and Star Wars, the characters talk like this. In this elevated, not exactly Shakespearean way, but this elevated way. And it's just such a great story. I'm going to have to rate it after you do. What's your rating?
Initially, I found things a little slow, but once it got started, by the time we get into this portion, it's like page after page I wanted to turn
to read faster.
Exactly.
I
am going to rate it 2.5.
You ought to be ashamed of yourself, Dan. That rating is a lie. It's a thing of the dark side. How dare you? Dark Lord Dan, indeed.
Well, Master Joe, what would you rate it?
3.5.
Oh, why is that?
Because this is one of the best graphic novel stories ever told. This is the near-perfect Star Wars tale. It is a story of love, true love in the familial sense, such as between siblings. It is a story of loss, tragedy, missed opportunities, and also of wisdom gained. And so we we get to see the story of the greatest Jedi who ever lived, Odan-urr. We get to see the story of one of the greatest heroines, Jory. But here's the thing. They're all flawed, and they're all great. Even Nagasato's a great character and an incredibly deep character. Same with Ludo Kresh. And the thing is, this story is one of the greatest sci-fi tales ever told. How many sci-fi stories are told on this galactic, infinite scale like this? And involve such archetypal characters.
Like if the foundation of everything Star Wars.
Yeah.
Okay, when we put it that way, I suppose 3 would be good for me.
I still think that's low. But the story is also... It's just a grand opera. It's like a Shakespearean drama. And so you see that not only how things are getting set up, but you're also seeing that in its own right, it's a tragic story. Like Gav, what could he have accomplished had he not had his great get-rich-quick schemes and not fallen to the dark side or not chosen to die? Had Gav become a Jedi Master like he was supposed to, imagine what wonders he could have accomplished. Imagine what might have happened had he not dragged his sister from the Jedi temples. There's so much that could have been accomplished. I kind of feel like I wish he didn't commit suicide the way he did. Yes, Jory saved his soul, but he still committed suicide to an extent. And that's where you just wish for more for him. If only he had had more wisdom. But he was consumed by his pain and anguish, and you can hardly... You can't fully blame him. But you can, in a way.
Jory should have never left the Jedi Order. But had she not left the Jedi Order, she wouldn't have come back and warned the Republic.
Fair enough.
It's
a complex thing, and yeah, that's the thing. This story is brilliantly told. It's expertly narrated and whatnot. And it's just on such a scale, and yet with such a small cast of characters. It was so well done. And yet there is no sci-fi story quite like it, I find. It is so brilliant. And I find that in some ways I actually like it more than most other Star Wars stories, because it's on such a monumental scale, and yet it keeps it simple. And yet it's not copying the originals exactly. Like, it is copying the original trilogy, but not exactly. So that I actually like that. And I find that I kind of like Nagasato more as a villain than Palpatine. Well, I like Palpatine in the prequels to an extent more than the originals, because him just being a cackling old man is just a little boring. Nagasato, we see him cackle like that, but also manipulate and also just work his magic. But here's the thing, he's a doomed figure. Everybody knows it, that he's cursed, basically. But he's in denial about it. And he's such a narcissist, he doesn't want to recognize it. So there's something fascinating surrounding his character there.
And Ludo Kresh is also a villain. But the way it's set up, he's far more sympathetic than Nagasato.
At the same time, I'd like to see a line of Sith Lords descended from him, so to speak. Because, you've got Nagasato, who's got Friedan Nad, then from Friedan Nad you get Exar Kun, and from Exar Kun you get Revan and Malak, and from them you then eventually get Darth Ruin, and from him you come down to Darth Bane and whatnot. That's a Nagasato line. What's the alternative line of succession, so to speak, of the Sith Lords? I wonder what that line would be like. Imagine if they actually pursued that plot point.
Because Ludo Kresh was missing for a while. For all we know, he was preparing in case he was killed.
Well, yeah. And here's the thing. Because he has a tomb, it shows that his followers were lurking around for a while after his death. So I'm just thinking, what if his spirit ended up also taking on a student? Kind of like what Nagasato kind of did. So I just think that there should be an alternative line of succession amongst the Dark Lords. and then that would be a great plot device. But I don't know, that's just me, I think. Anyways, if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to smash that like and that subscribe button as though you were Vader trying to smash one of his enemies into, or one of his incompetent officers into itty bitty pieces.